In my career, through my business, I've been fortunate to meet and interview some extremely successful self-made millionaires, from small business owners through to CEOs of publicly listed companies. This has therefore given me the privilege and the honor of meeting over 1,000 multi-millionaires during the past 20 years. And look, while many of us dream of reaching this level of success, I've noticed some key traits and habits that actually really set them apart. Hi, I'm Gia, and today I want to share with you the 5 most important lessons and habits that I've learned from these individuals about who they are, what they do, and what it really takes to build long-lasting generational wealth. You see, the first lesson, and actually one of the earliest patterns I noticed, was actually how healthy these multimillionaires had in terms of their relationship with money. They didn't treat money as something that was actually like just sacred or dangerous or even morally charged. Instead, they really spoke about it in like very practical terms, grounded terms in fact, because to them, money was simply a resource that allowed them to create the life that they wanted and to really take care of the people that they loved around them and to pursue opportunities that truly mattered. You know, it supported their choices. It did not define their identity or self-worth. They really saw that money was purely just a tool for their lives. And look, what struck me the most was actually like how little emotional drama that they had around money and creating wealth, especially during conversations. And you know, when money stops being tied to fear or validation, decision-making becomes clearer and even more rational. They weren't trying to like prove anything, and they weren't panicking when numbers were fluctuating, which it often does. And therefore, these multimillionaires, they really understood, as I said, that money is a tool, and like any other tool, that it really works best when it is used with intention rather than simply emotion. Now, the second pattern that really became impossible for me to ignore was actually how many of them had built something of their own. Look, while not all multi-millionaires are business owners, the overwhelming majority of them that I met had actually created or owned a business at some point in their lives. Look, earning a high salary is great, but having equity, having ownership in something that belongs to you actually gives you that unlimited upside. And as for these multimillionaires, they weren't just earning money, they were truly creating value. And some of the wealthiest individuals that I met actually ran companies most people would never even recognize or even have heard of, you know, because boring was what they were specializing in. But most importantly, these businesses were extremely profitable, they were very well structured, and most importantly, they were well built to endure for generations. And they understood leverage, ownership, and the power of building systems that could operate without constant supervision. You know, for them, wealth came from creating something that solved a real problem, and they continue to deliver this value time and time again. So you can tell from for them, it wasn't just about like this endless hustle or chasing growth for the sake of it. It was truly about building something solid and sustainable, and something that was actually delivering value to the community. And the third lesson here actually really surprised me more than I expected, because a lot of these multimillionaires, when they had financial advisors or accountants or even investment teams, what I noticed was that they actually stayed very actively involved in the process of managing and growing their own wealth. So the third lesson and habit is that they truly enjoyed making, managing, and growing their money and their wealth. To them, they gamified it. It was fun, and they really took a lot of like ownership around that. And they often did this by asking really thoughtful questions and took joy from educating themselves. You know, they reviewed performance and made adjustments whenever it was necessary, not because they were anxious or controlling, but because they were genuinely interested in the game of actually generating wealth, making money. And you know, wealth to them wasn't actually just like a destination where you would just switch off once they arrived. It's like your health, it's ongoing maintenance. It was an ongoing process that really required attention and curiosity. And therefore, they treated this like a long-term project rather than just a finish line that they would have to cross, and that was it. You know, what really stood out about this was their absence of stress. Like, their engagement came from responsibility and interest and not fear-driven. They understood that staying involved of the wealth creation process was part of respecting actually what they had built. And you know, most importantly, they really had fun. They enjoyed doing it. They loved the game. And now the fourth habit and lesson is that there is a common belief that wealthy people are like reckless risk takers, but that actually wasn't what I had observed at all. In fact, many of the multimillionaires I met were actually far more conservative than your average person. They actually spent much more time thinking about what could go wrong than what actually could go spectacularly right. You know, their decisions were really shaped around questions like, if this fails, what does this mean for me? Rather than asking, how big can this really get? They were always managing their downside. You know, therefore they really structured their finances in a way that allowed them to withstand those downturns, the market changes, and also unexpected events, because life happens. And because of that, when uncertainty showed up, they were really able to remain calm while everyone else was panicking. And their strength really didn't come from chasing like high risk opportunities and getting that adrenaline. It actually came from building resilience and protecting what they already had. And I remember one of them told me that, you know, after 40, you know, you've got to start to really look at the downside, and protecting your capital preservation was really their aim. And now the final and most reassuring habit or lesson that I learned actually was, in fact, how much these successful people valued fairness and long-term relationships. Like those outdated stereotypes of like the ruthless, cutthroat millionaire simply just didn't actually match my experience. They were so kind and generous with their time and resource. Because yeah, most of these multimillionaires that I met much preferred to play with fair negotiation, win-win outcomes, and partnerships that could last for years, rather than transactions that would deliver short-term gains where it's a win-lose transaction. They really understood that reputation carries weight, and that trust, once it's lost, it's actually incredibly difficult to rebuild. So that was what I had noticed. You know, they were so intentional about how they treated people. They really knew that relationships compound just like money does. And for them, success was not just measured in numbers, but rather in the quality of the connections that they built along the way. So there you have it. You know, after meeting over 1,000 self-made millionaires, this is my conclusion that I keep returning to, that, you know, it's not about the material wealth, you know, the houses and the cars or the income that actually set them apart. What really stood out was actually obviously their mindset and the energy that they bring to money, risk, relationships, and opportunity. It's how they really thought long term, how they stayed calm under pressure, and how they remained grounded as their wealth continued to grow. And a lot of them didn't mind growing slowly. And therefore, these lessons and habits didn't just influence the way I now do business, it really changed the way how I live, the decisions that are made, and the way success is benchmarked. So if this resonated with you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a comment about which lesson you consider you would like to explore further in your own life. So thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.